The sleek black limousine pulled up to City General Hospital at exactly 11:47 p.m. Victor Sterling stepped out, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the wet pavement. At 34, he commanded Sterling Pharmaceuticals, a billion-dollar empire built on cutting-edge research and premium medications. Tonight, however, his perfectly ordered world was about to be challenged in ways he never imagined. James Bennett, his loyal assistant and childhood friend, hurried to keep pace as they entered the hospital's main entrance. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the sterile white walls. Oh. Victor wrinkled his nose at the antiseptic smell mixed with something else he couldn't identify. The emergency board meeting is in conference room 3, James said, checking his tablet. Dr. Patricia Hawkins called it after the 16th patient showed the same mysterious symptoms. None of their treatments are working. Victor's jaw tightened. Sterling Pharmaceuticals had a significant partnership with City General Hospital. In any medical crisis that stumped their doctors reflected poorly on his company's reputation. He had built his empire on the promise that modern medicine could solve any problem, given enough resources and advanced technology. Dr. Patricia Hawkins met them at the elevator. Her usually pristine lab coat wrinkled from hours of work. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her graying hair escaped from its typical neat bun. As the head of research at the hospital, she rarely showed such signs of stress. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for coming so quickly," she said, extending her hand. "We have a situation that's beyond anything we've encountered before." The elevator doors closed, carrying them to the 3rd floor. Dr. Hawkins explained the crisis as they ascended. 16 patients, ranging in age from 22 to 78, had arrived over the past week with identical symptoms. They experienced severe fatigue, mysterious joint pain, and a peculiar rash that appeared and disappeared without pattern. Blood tests showed unusual inflammatory markers, but no known virus or bacteria could be identified. "We've tried everything," Dr. Hawkins continued as they walked down the corridor. "Antibiotics, antivirals, anti-inflammatory medications, even experimental treatments from your latest research division. Nothing provides lasting relief." The conference room buzzed with activity. 12 doctors sat around a large oval table, their laptops open and medical journals scattered across the surface. Charts and test results covered the whiteboard, creating a maze of medical terminology and frustrated scribbles. Dr. Michael Torres, the hospital's chief of medicine, looked up as Victor entered. "Mr. Sterling, perhaps your team has encountered something similar. We're running out of options." Victor took his seat at the head of the table, projecting the confidence that had made him one of the youngest pharmaceutical CEOs in the country. "Walk me through everything you've tried." For the next hour, the medical team presented their findings. They had consulted with specialists from 3 major universities, run extensive genetic testing, and even contacted the Centers for Disease Control. Each treatment showed temporary promise before the symptoms returned with renewed intensity. "What about environmental factors?" asked Dr. Jennifer Walsh, an infectious disease specialist. "Could this be exposure to some industrial chemical?" "We checked," replied Dr. Torres. "Patients come from different neighborhoods, work in various industries, and have no common dietary or lifestyle patterns." Victor listened, making notes on his tablet. The symptoms didn't match any condition in Sterling Pharmaceuticals' extensive database. As the discussion continued, he noticed movement. In the hallway beyond the glass wall, a young woman in a simple blue uniform pushed a cleaning cart, stopping occasionally to empty trash bins and wipe down surfaces. The woman appeared to be in her mid-20s, with long dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Despite the late hour, she moved with quiet efficiency, never disturbing the ongoing meeting. There was something about her presence that struck Victor as different from the typical hospital staff. She carried herself with a dignity that seemed out of place for someone in her position. Dr. Hawkins noticed Victor's distraction. "That's Emma Grace," she said quietly. "One of our night shift cleaners. Always been here about 2 years, always. Does excellent work." Victor nodded absently and returned his attention to the medical discussion. The doctors continued their debate, each suggestion meeting with previous failed attempts. The frustration in the room grew palpable as the night wore on. Around 1:30 a.m., the meeting took a brief recess. Several doctors stepped out for coffee, while others made phone calls to colleagues at other hospitals. Victor remained in his chair, studying the patient files on his tablet. The complexity of the case intrigued him. Even as it threatened his company's reputation, Emma Grace entered the conference room to empty the trash and clean the table. She worked quietly, careful not to disturb the papers scattered across the surface. As she wiped down the whiteboard's edge, her eyes scanned the medical charts and symptoms lists. "Excuse me," she said softly, addressing Dr. Hawkins, who had remained in the room. "I couldn't help but notice the symptoms you've listed. Has anyone tried willow bark extract combined with chamomile and ginger root?" Dr. Hawkins looked up from her notes, surprise evident on her face. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Emma's cheeks flushed slightly, but she maintained her composure. "My grandmother was a folk healer in the mountains of North Carolina. She treated similar symptoms with a specific combination of herbs. The rash pattern and joint pain seemed familiar." Victor's head snapped up from his tablet. A cleaning woman. Suggesting medical treatments to trained doctors struck him as both presumptuous and absurd. He stood up, his expensive suit making him appear even more imposing next to Emma's simple uniform. "Miss Grace, isn't it?" said, his voice carrying a cold edge. "While I'm sure your grandmother's folk remedies have their charm, we're dealing with a serious medical crisis that requires actual scientific solutions." Emma turned to face him, meeting his gaze directly. Her brown eyes showed no sign of intimidation, despite the obvious difference in their social positions. "Mr. Sterling, I understand your skepticism, but sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective ones." "Simple solutions," Victor repeated, his tone growing more condescending. "We have 16 people suffering from an unknown condition. 16 specialists with decades of training can't find an answer. And you think some backwoods herb mixture is going to solve everything?" The room fell silent as other doctors began filtering back in from their break. Dr. Hawkins watched the exchange with growing interest. While James Bennett looked uncomfortable with his boss's harsh tone, Emma didn't back down. "Traditional medicine has been helping people for thousands of years before pharmaceutical companies existed. Maybe instead of dismissing what you don't understand, you should consider that healing doesn't always come from a laboratory." Victor's eyes flashed with anger. "What I understand, Miss Grace, is that people trust Sterling Pharmaceuticals because we base our treatments on rigorous scientific research, not on folklore and superstition. Your grandmother's remedies might work for headaches or upset stomachs, but this is serious medicine. And yet your serious medicine isn't working," Emma replied calmly. "While you're arguing about my qualifications, those 16 patients are still suffering." Dr. Torres cleared his throat, attempting to diffuse the tension. "Perhaps we should focus on the medical aspects of this case." But Victor wasn't finished. He stepped closer to Emma, his voice low but carrying clearly across the room. "Let me make something perfectly clear, Miss Grace. This hospital partners with Sterling Pharmaceuticals because we provide proven, FDA-approved treatments. We don't rely on folktales and wishful thinking." Emma straightened her shoulders, matching his intensity. "And let me make something clear to you. Mr. Sterling, I've seen your proven treatments fail more times than I can count while working. In this hospital, sometimes healing requires humility, not arrogance." The challenge in her voice surprised everyone in the room, including Victor. No one spoke to him with such directness, especially not a hospital employee in a service position. The silence stretched uncomfortably as the two faced each other across the conference table. Dr. Hawkins finally broke the tension. "Mr. Sterling, Miss Grace, perhaps we should continue our medical discussion." Emma nodded, gathering her cleaning. "Supplies, of course, Dr. Hawkins. I apologize for the interruption." She paused at the door, looking back at the assembled doctors. "If you change your minds about the herbal treatment, the recipe is quite simple. Willow bark for inflammation, chamomile for the nervous system response, and ginger root to support the digestive issues I noticed mentioned in the charts." After Emma left, the room remained quiet for several moments. Victor returned to his seat, his jaw tight with irritation. The cleaning woman's audacity bothered him more than he cared to admit. In his world, expertise came from degrees, research, and proven track records, not from folk wisdom passed down through generations. Dr. Hawkins spoke up hesitantly. You know, Mr. Sterling, many of our modern medications are derived from traditional plant remedies. Aspirin comes from willow bark, and we use ginger for nausea in cancer patients. That's different, Victor replied curtly. Those compounds have been isolated, purified, and tested under controlled conditions. We know exactly how they work and in what dosages they're effective. The meeting resumed, but the doctor's enthusiasm had diminished. They reviewed the same failed treatments, proposed the same unsuccessful approaches, and came no closer to a solution. As dawn approached, Victor felt his frustration mounting. Sterling Pharmaceuticals' reputation was built on solving the unsolvable. Yet they were being defeated by a mysterious condition that a cleaning woman claimed her grandmother could have treated. Around 5 a.m., Dr. Torres received an urgent page from the nursing station. I need to check on the patients, he announced, rising from his chair. I'll come with you, Dr. Hawkins said, and several other doctors followed. Victor remained in the conference room with James, staring at the whiteboard covered in failed hypotheses. This is unacceptable. James, we can't let word get out that Sterling Pharmaceuticals couldn't handle a simple hospital case. James nodded, but his expression remained thoughtful. Victor, what if that cleaning woman was right? What if there's something to her grandmother's remedy? Victor's eyes hardened. Don't tell me you're buying into folk medicine nonsense too. I'm just saying we've tried everything else. What harm could it do to test her suggestion? The harm, Victor replied icily, would be to our credibility. Sterling Pharmaceuticals doesn't experiment with unproven folk remedies. We're a serious company that relies on scientific methodology. 20 minutes later, Dr. Torres returned to the conference room with an expression Victor had never seen before. His face showed a mixture of amazement and confusion that made Victor's stomach tighten with apprehension. Mr. Sterling, Dr. Torres said slowly, you need to see this. They followed him to the medical wing, where the 16 patients occupied a specialized isolation unit. As they approached the nurse's station, Victor noticed unusual activity. Instead of the worried, hurried movements he had observed earlier, the nursing staff appeared calm, even pleased. What's going on? Dr. Hawkins asked Nurse Jennifer Martinez, looked up from her charts, smiling for the first time in days. It's the most remarkable thing, Doctor. About 3 hours ago, several patients began showing significant improvement. Their joint pain has decreased, the rashes are fading, and their energy levels are returning to normal. Victor felt his world shift slightly. What treatment did you administer? That's just it, Nurse Martinez replied. We didn't change anything. But I did notice that Emma Grace had been spending extra time with some of the patients during her shift. She was very careful to follow all protocols, but she seemed to be offering them some kind of herbal tea. Dr. Torres nodded grimly. I've spoken with 5 patients so far. They all confirmed that Miss Grace provided them with an herbal mixture she prepared at home. Willow bark, chamomile, and ginger root, exactly as she suggested in the meeting. The silence that followed felt heavy with implications. Victor stared through the glass partition at the patients, many of whom were sitting up in bed for the first time in days, talking with their families, and even laughing. The improvement was undeniable, but accepting it meant admitting that a hospital cleaner had succeeded where his company's best minds had failed. Get me, Miss Grace, Victor said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of anger and something else he couldn't quite identify. Now, Emma Grace arrived at the hospital administration office at 9 a.m. sharp, still wearing her cleaning uniform from the night shift. She had received an urgent message to report immediately, and the tone suggested she might be in serious trouble. Her hands trembled slightly as she knocked on the door marked Chief Administrator. Come in, called a familiar voice. Emma stepped inside to find Victor Sterling seated behind the large oak desk, his expensive suit immaculate despite the early hour. James Bennett stood beside him, tablet in hand, while Dr. Hawkins occupied one of the leather chairs facing the desk. The morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows cast sharp shadows across Victor's face. emphasizing the intensity of his dark eyes. "Miss Grace," Victor began, his tone measured and controlled. "Please, have a seat." Emma remained standing, her chin raised slightly in defiance. "If this is about what happened last night, I followed all hospital protocols. Entered patient rooms during restricted hours, and I certainly didn't administer any unauthorized treatments." "Sit down," Victor repeated. And this time his voice carried an edge that made it clear this wasn't a request. Emma reluctantly took the chair across from Dr. Hawkins, clasping her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. She had worked too hard to get this job, to lose it over helping people. She wouldn't apologize for doing what she believed was right. Victor studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Tell me about your grandmother's medical knowledge." The question caught Emma off guard. She had expected accusations, threats, or demands for explanations about her interference with hospital procedures. Instead, Victor seemed genuinely interested in learning about her background. "My grandmother, Violet Grace, was what people called a root doctor," Emma said carefully. "She lived in the mountains of North Carolina, treated folks who couldn't afford regular doctors or were too far from the nearest hospital." "Root doctor," Victor repeated, making notes on his tablet. "What kind of training did she have? Traditional? Training passed down through generations of women in our family. She learned from her mother, who learned from hers, going back over 100 years. They memorized which plants helped, which conditions, how to prepare them, and when to use them." Bennett looked up from his own notes. "Did she have any formal medical education?" Emma shook her head. "She could barely read, but she could identify over 200 healing plants and knew exactly how to use each one. She delivered babies, set broken bones, and treated everything from pneumonia to depression using only what grew wild in the mountains." Victor leaned back in his chair, processing this information. The logical part of his mind rejected everything Emma was saying as unscientific nonsense. But the undeniable success of her treatment the previous night forced him to reconsider his assumptions. "How did you learn these methods, Dr. Hawkins?" asked, her scientific curiosity evident. "I spent every summer with grandmother Violet from the time I was 5 until she died when I was 18, Emma replied. "She taught me to recognize plants, understand their properties, and prepare them properly. She always said that healing came from understanding the whole person, not just their symptoms." Victor's phone buzzed with a text message. Glanced at it, and his expression darkened. "The hospital board is meeting this afternoon to discuss what happened last night. Word has already spread about the miraculous recovery of our mystery patients." Emma felt her stomach clench with anxiety. "Mr. Sterling, I never meant to cause any trouble for the hospital or your company. I just couldn't watch those people suffer. When I knew something that might help them, it's exactly the problem," Victor said, standing and walking to the window. "Your unauthorized treatment worked. Do you understand what that means for Sterling Pharmaceuticals?" Emma looked between Victor and Dr. Hawkins, confused by the implications. "It means the patients are feeling better. It means," Victor continued, turning back to face her, "that a cleaning woman with no formal medical training succeeded where our entire research division failed. It means that newspapers and medical journals will want to know how traditional folk remedies outperformed cutting-edge pharmaceutical science." The weight of the situation began to settle on Emma's shoulders. She had acted purely from compassion. But her simple gesture had apparently created a public relations crisis for one of the most powerful men in the medical industry. "What do you want me to do?" she asked quietly. Victor returned to his seat. Leaning forward with his hands clasped on the desk, "I want you to work for Sterling Pharmaceuticals." Emma blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry, what?" "I'm offering you a position in our research division. You'll have access to proper laboratory facilities, trained botanists, and the resources to develop your grandmother's remedies into legitimate pharmaceutical products." The offer stunned Emma into silence. She stared at Victor, trying to understand his motivations. Was this a genuine opportunity, or an attempt to control her knowledge and keep it from becoming public? "I don't understand," she said finally. "Yesterday you dismissed everything I said as folklore and superstition. Now you want me to join your company? Yesterday, I was wrong, Victor admitted, the words clearly difficult for him to say. The results speak for themselves. What I want to know is whether your grandmother's knowledge extends beyond that one herbal combination. Emma stood up, pacing to the window and looking out at the city skyline. The gleaming towers of downtown represented a world completely foreign to her mountain upbringing. Yet here was Victor Sterling, offering her a chance to be part of it. She knew treatments for dozens of conditions, Emma said slowly. Arthritis, anxiety, digestive problems, skin conditions, sleep disorders. She even had remedies that seemed to help with what doctors now call autoimmune diseases. Dr. Hawkins leaned forward in her chair. Emma, if even half of what you're saying is accurate, this could revolutionize how we approach certain medical conditions. Many of our most effective drugs originated from traditional plant remedies. But with proper scientific validation, Victor added quickly, we would need to test everything. Identify the active compounds, determine safe dosages, and conduct clinical trials. Emma turned from the window to face them. What happens to the traditional knowledge? Do you patent my grandmother's recipes and sell them for hundreds of dollars to people who could grow the plants in their own gardens? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Victor felt the familiar tension between profit and principle that he had spent years avoiding. Sterling Pharmaceuticals existed to make money, but Emma's direct gaze forced him to confront the ethical implications of his business model. We would compensate you fairly for your contributions, he said carefully. That's not what I asked, Emma replied firmly. I want to know if you plan to take healing knowledge that has been freely shared for generations and turn it into expensive products that only wealthy people can afford. James Bennett shifted uncomfortably in his chair, recognizing the moral complexity of the situation. He had known Victor since childhood and understood that beneath his corporate exterior lay a man who genuinely wanted to help people, even if profit had become his primary motivator. What would you suggest? Victor asked, surprising himself with the question. Emma returned to her chair, considering her response carefully. If I were to work with you, I would want guarantees that any traditional remedies we develop would be made available at cost to people who can't afford regular medications. And I would want the original plant-based versions to remain freely available to anyone who wants to prepare them at home. Victor felt a muscle in his jaw twitch with irritation. Everything about Emma's proposal went against basic business principles. Pharmaceutical companies invested millions in research and development, precisely because they could recoup those costs through patent protection and premium pricing. Miss Grace, you're asking me to give away potential billion-dollar treatments? For free, I'm asking you to remember that healing shouldn't be a privilege reserved for the wealthy, Emma replied. My grandmother never charged more than people could afford, and often she charged nothing at all. Dr. Hawkins cleared her throat diplomatically. Perhaps we could discuss the specifics of any arrangement later. Right now, we have a more immediate problem. Victor nodded grimly. The board meeting this afternoon, they're going to want explanations about what happened last night. They're not going to be satisfied with vague references to traditional medicine. What do you need from me? Emma asked. I need you to present your grandmother's knowledge in a way that sounds scientifically credible, Victor said. Can you explain the biochemical basis for why your herbal combination worked? Emma shook her head. Grandmother Violet didn't think in terms of biochemistry. She understood plants as whole entities with spirits and personalities. She believed that healing happened when the right plant spirits connected with the human spirit. Victor closed his eyes, feeling a headache building behind his temples. How could he present folk spiritual concepts to a board of directors who dealt exclusively in quantifiable results and profit margins? There has to be a scientific explanation, he said desperately. Willow bark contains salicin, which converts to salicylic acid in the body. Chamomile has anti-inflammatory compounds. Ginger has gingerol, which affects prostaglandin production. We can work with that. Emma watched Victor struggle to translate her grandmother's wisdom into corporate language, and she felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for him. He was trapped between two worlds, trying to bridge a gap that might be unbridgeable. Mr. Sterling, she said gently, what if the scientific explanation isn't the whole story? What if there's something about the way traditional healing works that can't be reduced to chemical compounds and molecular interactions. The question touched something deep in Victor's consciousness that he had been avoiding for years. His father had died of cancer despite access to the most advanced treatments Sterling Pharmaceuticals could provide. All their scientific knowledge and expensive medications had failed to save the one person who mattered most to him. "That's not how the world works," he said quietly, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. Emma stood and walked around the desk, a gesture that would have been unthinkable in any other circumstance. She placed her hand gently on Victor's shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Maybe it's time to consider that the world works differently than you've been taught," she said softly. Victor looked up at her, seeing something in her brown eyes that he had never encountered before. It wasn't pity or condescension, but a deep understanding that seemed to reach into parts of himself he had kept carefully hidden. "The board meeting is in 4 hours," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then we have 4 hours to figure out how to present my grandmother's wisdom in a way that honors both worlds," Emma replied. For the first time since entering the room, Victor smiled. It was a small, tentative expression, but it transformed his entire face. Emma felt her heart skip slightly, recognizing that beneath his corporate armor was a man who had forgotten how to trust in anything beyond his own control. "All right, Miss Grace," he said, standing to face her. "Teach me about your grandmother's medicine." As Emma began to explain the principles of traditional healing, Victor found himself drawn into a world he had never imagined. Her voice carried the rhythm of mountain storytelling, painting pictures of plants that grew in hidden valleys and healers who understood the language of the earth itself. For the first time in years, Victor Sterling forgot about profit margins and market share. He forgot about corporate strategies and competitive advantages. He simply listened to a young woman whose wisdom came from sources his MBA had never taught him to value. And as the morning sun climbed higher above the city, two very different people began to discover that healing could happen in unexpected ways, touching not just the body, but the heart itself. 3 months after Emma, Grace joined Sterling Pharmaceuticals as their traditional medicine research specialist. Her modest laboratory had become the most talked-about department in the building. The walls were lined with carefully labeled jars containing dried herbs, roots, and botanical specimens she had collected from various regions. The space smelled of lavender and eucalyptus, stark contrast to the sterile chemical odors that typically filled pharmaceutical facilities. Emma stood at her workstation, grinding willow bark with a marble mortar and pestle, while Victor watched. From the doorway, over the past weeks, he had found himself spending increasing amounts of time in her laboratory, ostensibly to monitor her progress, but actually because her presence had become something he craved, without fully understanding why. "The board is meeting again tomorrow," Victor said, entering the room and closing the door behind him. "They want to see concrete results from your research." Emma looked up from her work, noting the tension in Victor's shoulders and the worry lines around his eyes that had deepened recently. "What kind of results are they expecting?" "Patentable compounds, clinical trial data, projected profit margins," Victor replied, running his hand through his hair, and the gesture Emma had learned indicated his stress levels, the kind of results that justify the investment they've made. In this department, Emma set down her mortar and pestle, wiping her hands on her apron. "Victor, we've talked about this. Traditional healing doesn't work that way. You can't reduce a holistic practice to a series of isolated chemical compounds." "I know that," Victor said, moving closer to her workstation. "But they don't. To them, you're either a valuable asset that generates revenue or an expensive experiment that needs to be terminated." The words hung between them like a threat. Had known this day would come, but she had hoped their recent successes would buy them more time. Her herbal treatments had helped dozens of patients who hadn't responded to conventional therapies. But none of these victories translated into the kind of quantifiable profits the board demanded. "What are you saying?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. Victor moved to the window overlooking the city skyline, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. "I'm saying that, unless we can present them with something that fits their business model, they're going to shut down your research and terminate your contract." Emma felt a familiar mixture of disappointment and determination rise in her chest. She had faced skepticism and dismissal her entire life, But losing this opportunity meant more than just a job. It meant losing the chance to bridge two worlds of healing that desperately needed each other. "There's something else," Victor continued, his voice quieter now. "There have been rumors about my commitment to the company's traditional profit model. Some board members are questioning whether my judgment has been compromised by personal interests." Emma's heart stopped. Personal interests. Victor turned from the window to face her, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "They think I'm allowing my feelings for you to cloud my business decisions." The admission hung in the air between them, carrying all the weight of what they had both been avoiding for months. Their working relationship had gradually evolved into something deeper, marked by lingering glances, accidental touches, and conversations that stretched far beyond professional necessity. "Are they right?" Emma asked softly. Victor stepped closer. Close enough that she could see the conflict in his dark eyes. "Yes," he said simply. "My feelings for you are definitely clouding my judgment. The question is whether that's a weakness or the first clear thinking I've done in years." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had felt the connection growing between them, but had convinced herself it was one-sided, that a wealthy CEO could never seriously care for a woman from her humble background. "Victor," she began, but he held up his hand to stop her. "Before you say anything, you need to know what choosing you means," he said. "If I stand up to the board tomorrow and defend your research, I'll probably lose my position as CEO. Sterling Pharmaceuticals will revert to their traditional profit-focused model, and everything we've worked for will disappear." Emma felt tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "You can't sacrifice your life's work for me." "It wouldn't be a sacrifice," Victor replied, reaching out to touch her face gently. "It would be choosing what matters over what pays. You've taught me that there's a difference." The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted them, and Victor stepped back as James Bennett appeared in the doorway. His expression was grim, and Emma knew immediately that something serious had happened. "Victor, we have a problem, James," said Channel 7 News just ran a story about traditional medicine at Sterling Pharmaceuticals. Somehow, they got hold of Emma's patient success stories. Victor's face went pale. How is that possible? "All of Emma's work has been confidential." "Someone leaked the information," James replied, handing Victor his tablet. "The story's already trending on social media, and the stock price is dropping." Emma watched Victor read the news report, seeing his expression shift from shock to anger to something that looked like defeat. The headline read, "Pharmaceutical Giant Abandons Science for Folk Medicine," and featured a photo of Emma in her laboratory, surrounded by her herbs and traditional healing tools. "This is a disaster," Victor muttered, scrolling through the comments. "Listen to this. Sterling Pharmaceuticals has apparently given up on real medicine in favor of witch doctor treatments. What's next? Crystal healing and aromatherapy?" Emma felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. She had known that her methods would face ridicule from the mainstream medical community, but seeing her life's work reduced to mockery in the national media was devastating. "I should resign," she said quietly. This is exactly what the board was afraid would happen. "No," Victor said firmly, setting down the tablet and taking her hands in his. "We're not running away from this. If people want to judge traditional medicine without understanding it, that's their ignorance, not our failure." James cleared his throat diplomatically. "Victor, the board has called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. They want Emma present to explain her research methods." Emma looked between the two men, understanding that her moment of truth had arrived. She could either defend her grandmother's wisdom to a hostile audience or quietly disappear back to her cleaning job and let Victor's career survive intact. "I'll be there," she said, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. The Sterling Pharmaceuticals boardroom had been designed to intimidate. With its floor-to-ceiling windows, massive mahogany table, and portraits of company founders staring down from the walls, Emma sat at the far end of the table, her simple blue dress a stark contrast to the expensive suits surrounding her. Board Chairman Robert Whitman, silver-haired man in his 70s, led the interrogation with barely concealed hostility. "Miss Grace, can you explain to us how a cleaning woman with no medical credentials came to direct a multi-million-dollar research initiative?" Emma straightened her shoulders, drawing on every lesson her grandmother had taught her about standing up. "Two bullies. Mr. Whitman, I came to direct this research because my methods work. 16 patients who had been failed by conventional medicine recovered using my grandmother's herbal treatments. Anecdotal evidence dismissed Dr. Caroline Fletcher, the company's chief scientific officer. Without controlled studies and peer review, your so-called successes are meaningless. Meaningless to whom? Emma challenged. To the statistical models you use to evaluate treatments, or to the patients who went home healthy to their families? The room fell silent at her directness. Board members exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with being questioned by someone they considered beneath their status. Miss Grace Whitman continued, "Traditional medicine belongs in the past. Modern pharmaceutical science has moved beyond folk remedies and superstition." Emma stood up, her voice carrying the strength of generations of mountain healers who had faced similar dismissal. "Mr. Whitman, my grandmother delivered over 300 babies without losing a single mother or child. She treated depression, anxiety, and autoimmune conditions decades before your modern science had names for them. That's not superstition. That's a different kind of knowledge. A knowledge that can't be quantified, patented, or profitably marketed," added CFO Margaret Stone. "How do you propose we build a sustainable business model around treatments that any amateur can prepare in their kitchen?" This was the question Emma had been preparing for since joining the company. She looked down the table at Victor, who nodded encouragingly, then back at the hostile faces surrounding her. "You don't," she said simply. "You build a business model around healing people, not extracting maximum profit from their suffering. You make traditional remedies freely available while using your resources to research and develop enhanced versions for more serious conditions." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma could practically hear the board members calculating the financial implications of her proposal. "That's completely unrealistic," Whitman said finally. "Pharmaceutical companies exist to generate returns. For shareholders, not to give away free treatments?" And that, Emma replied, is exactly what's wrong with modern medicine. Victor watched the exchange with growing admiration for Emma's courage and growing certainty about his own choices. When Whitman turned to him with obvious displeasure, he was ready. "Surely you understand that Miss Grace's approach is incompatible with our business objectives." Victor stood up, feeling a sense of freedom he hadn't experienced in years, actually, Mr. Whitman. "I think Emma's approach represents the future of ethical medicine. And if Sterling Pharmaceuticals isn't ready for that future, then perhaps it's time for new leadership." The gasps around the table confirmed what Victor already knew. He had just ended his career as CEO, but for the first time in his adult life, he felt completely certain he was making the right decision. "Are you resigning?" Whitman asked, unable to hide his shock. "I'm choosing principles over profit," Victor replied, walking around the table to stand beside Emma. "Something this company seems to have forgotten how to do." He took Emma's hand, feeling her trembling despite her outward composure. "Emma Grace has more integrity and genuine healing wisdom than anyone in this room. If you can't see that, the problem isn't with her research, it's with your values." 6 months later, Emma stood in the garden behind the small clinic she and Victor had opened in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of the city. They called it the Integrated Healing Center, and it offered both traditional herbal treatments and modern medical care to anyone who needed help. Regardless of their ability to pay, Victor emerged from the clinic carrying 2 cups of chamomile tea, his expensive suits replaced by casual clothes that suited him far better. The stress lines around his eyes had faded, replaced by laugh lines that deepened when he smiled at her. How was your first day teaching at the medical school?" Emma asked, accepting the warm cup gratefully. "Terrifying and wonderful," Victor replied, settling beside her on the wooden bench they had built together. 25 future doctors learning that healing involves more than prescribing medications. Your grandmother would have been proud." Emma leaned against his shoulder, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. "She would have liked you, you know. She always said the best healing happened when people learned to trust their hearts instead of just their heads." Victor set down his tea and turned to face her, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Speaking of trusting hearts, I have something to ask you." Emma's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small emerald. "Victor, what are you doing?" I'm asking the woman who taught me that love is the most powerful medicine to marry me, he said, his voice soft with emotion. I'm asking if you'll spend the rest of your life helping me remember that healing people matters more than anything else in the world. Emma looked into his eyes, seeing the man who had transformed from a cold corporate executive into someone who put compassion before profit, who had given up wealth and status to build something meaningful with her. Yes, she whispered, as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Yes, to all of it. As they kissed in the golden light of evening, the city around them seemed to fade away, leaving only two people who had found in each other the perfect medicine for hearts that had been searching for something real. The clinic they had built together would go on to treat thousands of patients, training a new generation of healers who understood that true medicine required both scientific knowledge and compassionate wisdom. But in that moment, surrounded by the herbs and flowers Emma had planted, they were simply two people who had discovered that the greatest healing of all was learning to love without fear. Victor had lost his corporate empire but gained something infinitely more valuable. Emma had left behind her humble beginnings, but never forgotten the lessons that had shaped her. Together, they had created a new kind of healing that honored both worlds, proving that sometimes the most powerful medicine is simply opening your heart to possibilities you never imagined.